Right, well, I've applied some graphite powder. I always do it in this container so that I've got it all in one place. And I'll just use the tip of my tweezers to work that blade actuating ring backwards and forwards to settle all that graphite powder in between any working surfaces, and that should be good to go. Now, the speed train, the retard gear train, I'll just gather some powder up, drop it onto the wheels, hold back the pallets with my finger and work the action. And do the same again. Now I've got that all lubricated to my satisfaction. I just need to take my blower and go and blow that out. Get rid of all that excess powder. We don't want loose powder floating around in the shutter. So now this is all nicely cleaned and lubricated. If I hold back the pallets, you'll see that that retard gear train moves much more freely than it did when we started off, which basically means that it'll work correctly in time. The shutters with timings will work correctly too. Okay, so that's good. That's our mechanism plate dealt to. Pop that to one side. Let's deal with this. All of these pieces need to be cleaned. Same procedure. Naphtha on a cotton bud. Start with the case. Swab the case inside and out. You can see the dirt that's coming off. That's a pretty good example. They're often much worse than that. Unusually, the focus helical was quite stiff. That grease has long since lost all its more volatile components, and you would expect to see those volatile components, a lot of them migrate to the back of the shutter, and that doesn't seem to be the case here. The shutter was quite clean, which suggests that perhaps the shutter had been serviced in more recent times and all the dirt and filth was removed at that point. Oh, that was just me tipping everything out of the container. I had everything carefully put aside. And of course, when you took the shutter apart, if you're doing this job, I'm sure you would be carefully laying out the parts in a neat line so you knew exactly where everything went back. I don't do that. I work from a pile. Okay, so there's our case. I'm pleased with the state of that. The blade, this piece here, this is the piece that swings our blades in and out. You can see I'm just holding this by the edges so as not to leave fingerprints all over it like someone has previously. This piece is in quite good order. It's not so badly stained, and because the diaphragm blades, there's no requirement that they move at ridiculous speeds. A little bit of friction is not a problem at all. And the retaining plate, well, this face with the 5 little indents in it, this faces the shutter blades. It's a little bit stained. You can see stain coming off there. That's probably mostly old dried lubricants doing that. There could be an element of oxidation there. But that surface is nice and smooth. That surface that the shutter blades run against. This surface, the dead flat surface, that's the face that faces the diaphragm blades. And again, that's nice and smooth and clean. So I'll give that one more round with the solvent, and then we'll do those diaphragm blades, which is tedious because there's 10 of them. You can see the colour coming off. That's oil and other contaminants that were on the surface or in the surface or in the little hollows and so forth. Okay, that's good. The diaphragm blades, okay. Basically the procedure here, yeah, I know it's a very high contrast and you can see nothing because the blade's gone black. It's life as we know it. Basically the procedure here is to swab these blades carefully, taking care not to catch your cotton bud on the rivets or bending up the blade. And here I'm using the back of my tweezers to hold this down. I'm using very, very light pressure indeed. I don't want to distort this blade, I just want to make sure it stays where I can work on it. So that blade is good. There's a residual mark there. I'm not trying to chase out all the marks, I just want to make sure these blades are clean. The blade's not symmetrical. The pivot is closest to the middle line of the blade at this end, and if we swap it over, it's close to the outside edge of the blade at that end. That's important to know, because when we put the diaphragm back together, they have to go round the right way, and they all have to go round the same way. Okay, well that's blade number 1. I've got to do 10 of those. I'll get them sorted out and cleaned, and then you can see me put it back together. Reassembling the diaphragm. This plate, there's 5 little dimples on one side, that goes down. This is the jig I use for reassembling things. As you can see, it's a couple of sockets. And I think it's a 27 and a 10, I think, from memory. Now these blades, they go on here. You can start anywhere you like. The pivots that we're putting down into that plate are the pivots closest to the centre line of the blade. And we just put these blades in place, go around anti-clockwise, one after another. Now these blades are not lying down flat. That tells me that they're slightly distorted, which suggests to me that at some stage in their past the blades were stuck together with oil and didn't enjoy being forced to move. It tends to bow the blades up and then they don't lie flat. Now I'm back round to the start position, and of course the tail end of the blades are covering up the holes where I want to fit the next blade. So I've got to swing these blades out without moving them from their position at the other end. And I may or may not have achieved that because these blades are not lying flat. It's very likely one or more of the blades is not sitting correctly in position. Well, that doesn't need to be a disaster. Very often you can recover from that, and I'll certainly be hoping to recover from it this time. Yeah, those blades are not exactly sitting flat. Last one. Now I have to lift these blades back over the top of that one without disturbing anything and swing them back into position. Now I can tell immediately one of them's out of position because it's hanging out in space there instead of swinging neatly in position. So this may go badly. I've got all my blades present and correct. Well, present and not correct, but present anyway. This spring goes on, it only goes on in one position. Now I can tell by the alignment they've got 3 fixing screw holes in this plate. I know from experience I want that to sit there, and trying to get my blades seated on there. Now some of these blades, the pivots are not dropping into the slots, which means that the blades are probably not correctly positioned. This one in particular is away from the slot. I'm using a needle here, or pin, dressmaking pin, to try and pull that pivot back into line. Right, I've got all the ones around that side correct. Let's see if I can get these ones correct. Okay, so I've got all the pivots in the moving plate. I don't know if the other ends of the blades, the pivots are sitting correctly in the fixed plate. We'll find out shortly. Now this only fits on in one direction. We've got 2 screw holes here, 1 there. They match up with that 2 screw holes close together here. So I put this over the top, flip my jig over, here I can see the blades are not in position. A lot of them are just, they've popped out of place. And I can see that the pivots are nowhere near the holes. So I'm going to have a go at rescuing this. There are 3 screws. One of them's countersunk. You'll be able to see which place it goes. These screws I'm putting in very lightly indeed. I don't want to pull that plate down tight because of course some of the blades are not in the correct position. And I need room to be able to manoeuvre those pivots back where they should be. If this all goes to custard, well, I'll just have to start the process again. That's not the end of the world, that's a very common thing to have to deal with. But if I can recover from this without having to take it all apart, well, that'll save me 5 or 10 minutes, which is good. Okay, so that I can see that some of my pivots are obviously not in place, like that one there for example. I can pull that into position. I can pull that one into position. That one. That one. So they're all in position on this side. I'll tighten the screw down lightly, that'll hold those all in place. I have 2 pivots that I can't see. One is just coming into view as I push that blade across. And there's one more. I can see that the blade's not aligned correctly because it's sticking out. I can just see the edge of the rivet there. Yep, I can just see it, and pull that one into place. Okay, so I've got all 10 pivots correctly in their holes. I'll run these screws down lightly. Let's see if we get a nice circular opening. We do. So there you go, that we're recovered from that little problem. I can tighten the 3 screws up. And that's the diaphragm reassembled. All those blades are nice and clean and are moving freely. And I can put the settings lever back on the back of that now. I can put the aperture settings lever back on the shutter now. So I'll just clean the lever. Sometimes this will be quite contaminated with oil and grease. In this case it's not too bad. In fact, you could almost say it was suspiciously clean, considering the state of the focus helical. Alright, now I'm going to give that a wipe with molybdenum paste. Unlike earlier Compur Rapids, this shutter has detents for the aperture settings. So we don't need to have this thing stiff in its actions. Now this only goes on one way. You've got cutouts on the top of the housing here. This lever goes to the bottom of the housing. So we line up our holes here. This is going to go on that way. And we have our shoulder screws that hold that in place. Of course, I've since knocked the container over and picked everything up, so everything's scattered everywhere here. Get one of those screws in position. Get that started. It's not keen. That's better. And the same on the other side. So I can find the screw. There it is. I've got those 2 screws in position, and now I can check to make sure that the lever moves smoothly. Where's my block of wood? Alright, now that I know it all works, I want to do those screws up tight. So supporting it on the edge of the block of wood. Do that screw up. Don't go overboard doing those screws up. It's not uncommon for them to be stripped out. It's a very small thread. If it's stripped out, the usual course of action is to rivet the screw over to keep it in place, and you'll come across shutters that are exactly like that. The screws are no longer screws, they're rivets. Okay, so that's good. That's our diaphragm, all moves smoothly. We know the blades are clean. That's half of our shutter. And we've got the mechanism plate clean, ready to go, and lubricated. That brings us back to our shutter blades, which will need to be cleaned, because these are most definitely oily. In fact, these 2 blades were stuck together. Yeah, there's quite a bit of oil staining around those blades. I'll need to collect them, pick them up, And just swab these down with naphtha. I'll do one and see how it looks. If it looks good, all is well. Sometimes the staining won't go away. The oil has effectively become a lacquer and is or just won't dissolve with solvent. I'm looking at the state of this blade, and that was quite oily. That's cleaned up very well, so I'm not expecting any trouble. I'll just clean these 5 blades and then we can put the shutter together. Okay, so first thing here, unhook the spring, return spring from that lever, swing the lever out. That puts the shutter in the blade's open position, and start putting the shutter blades back. Now, blade number 1 has an extra hole. Why does it have an extra hole? Because it's blade number 1. Does it serve any other useful purpose? No. Let's get blade number 1 in position. And it goes right here. All the other blades are identical to blade number 1 except they lack the extra hole. The shutter blades cleaned up very nicely just with naphtha. Had they been seriously stained, or had there been any sign of roughness on the blades from corrosion, then I would have polished the blades with some brassate. I keep dropping this blade, it's starting to get very annoying. Okay, there's our 5 blades. Unlike diaphragm blades, shutter blades are just stacked one on top of another. So there is a first and a last blade. And the case can go on there. So I'll just locate this on my wooden block, because of course we have this tag sticking out at the bottom, so it won't just drop down anywhere. And if I get this case over there, I'm lining up the features. There's 3 mounting holes, they're all lined up. You can line it up because you can see the square hole in the mechanism plate and the case. It's easy to see at a glance where that needs to go. And we have 3 screws that hold these together, and because you're never absolutely certain that the blades stayed exactly where they were put before you put the case over the top, do not just rush in and tighten these screws up. Run them down gently and then confirm that the blades stayed where they were put. And the blades open and shut nicely, so we know that they're all correctly in position. Now I can go back and tighten those 3 screws up. And if I hook the return spring onto that lever, you'll see we've got nice snappy action there with the shutter blades. So our shutter blades and diaphragm blades are all clean, everything's back in the case, and the mechanism plate just lacks all the control gear now from the top. The first thing I want back into the shutter is our flash contact, so I put its earth contact back in place, and then see if I can wriggle this contact back into position. It's a square peg going into a square hole, but the square peg is often a little bit fractured and splayed at the end, so that doesn't always wriggle in easy. That one went very well. and I'll do up the screw. That's that. I did recover the little plastic insulator slug from that before I put it back in place, because it's much easier to fit the flash wire if you do it in the correct order, which is not leaving that thing in place. Okay, so that's all good so far. Let's put a few more pieces of this puzzle back in place. So we'll start here. These are the pallets. Now one side is nicely rounded off. That would have been just down to the way it was punched, I'd say. One side is flat, one side is nicely rounded off. Now the rounded off area should be at the top. That's so that it doesn't catch on anything as it swings. This is sitting raised on a post so that the flat underside, that can't possibly rub on anything. So we got that piece. Then we've got this piece, the wheel that drives that little pallet wheel thing. And what I normally do with this is around the toe of that cam, there's a cam, and the toe at the end of that cam lobe, I usually give that a wipe with molybdenum paste. Just here. That just ensures that the lever that runs against it will run smoothly over it. I'm just checking that that revolves smoothly. That's all good. The flash contact. Well, the flash contact and the lever that operates it are here. You can see how they're constructed. The lever sort of fits through the gap underneath that flash contact. It's a bit awkward. It's a bit awkward when it comes apart. That hasn't come apart, I'm not showing you that. I'll put the high-speed spring in place. Swing my flash contact and its lever into position. Now I'm just making sure that the tip of this arm is not sitting on top of the cam lobe at all, because otherwise you'd end up bending that arm when you put the screw in. I'll put that screw in place. As that cam lobe comes round, you'll see it moves that lever and makes the flash contact. It's moving nicely. Now, this piece. This section is made of two pieces. This is the catch that holds that flash sync drive in the cocked position. This little tab sits on here like that, and it's held together by the action of a spring underneath it. I'll zoom you in to show you more of a close-up of that, because it's difficult to see otherwise. That's probably enough. So you can see how it sits there over the top of that central boss. Now I've got to hook the spring up. So in order to hook the spring up, I've got to hold this together with one pair of tweezers, flip it over, wait for this thing to see if it'll focus. This end of the spring is a hook. It's got to be hooked around that arm there. This is always awkward. See if I can achieve it. Got to pick up that spring. I might need to get some better tweezers onto this job. Yeah, they're not doing it for me. Let me go away and get some better tweezers.